Blackbeard believed the merchant convoy was completely broken after his pirates dragged hundreds of women into the darkness below deck. But while the crew celebrated their greatest victory, the captives quietly studied every watch, every mistake, and every changing tide until a blanket of sea fog turned the world's most feared pirate into the unsuspecting victim of one of the most astonishing escapes of the Golden Age of Piracy. Picture the year 1718. Trace your finger along the map from the coast of North Carolina toward the warm waters of the Atlantic, and imagine the smell of rotting oak, boiling pine tar, damp hemp rigging, stale bilge water, and sulfur drifting across the sea beneath a sky darkened by gathering storm clouds. A heavily laden merchant convoy believed it had escaped danger after leaving Charlestown behind, but shortly before sunrise, dark silhouettes emerged from the morning fog. At their center sailed Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, commanding the fearsome Queen Anne's Revenge. Her towering masts carried blackened canvas while dozens of bronze cannon lined her gun decks, their barrels already trained upon the unsuspecting merchants. Within minutes, the silence shattered beneath deafening broadsides. Iron round shot smashed through thick oak hulls, ripping splinters across crowded decks with lethal force. Grappling hooks followed as pirates surged aboard waving cutlasses, boarding axes, and pistols still smoking from their first volley. The battle lasted less than half an hour, yet its consequences would echo for decades. Among the prisoners were hundreds of terrified women, wives of merchants, servants, passengers, and mothers traveling with their children, whose ordinary lives ended the instant Blackbeard's black flag climbed above the captured ships. Dragged below deck into overcrowded cargo holds where seawater seeped through swollen planks and rats fought over spoiled provisions, they survived on worm-infested hardtack, rancid salt beef, and foul rainwater collected inside cracked barrels. Every sunrise brought fresh uncertainty, as whispers spread that Blackbeard intended to keep the convoy hidden for weeks while demanding impossible ransoms from the colonies. Cut off from rescue and surrounded by armed pirates, the women understood that only extraordinary courage could keep them alive long enough to find a path back to freedom. Blackbeard wasted no time tightening his control over the captured convoy. Rather than sinking every prize immediately, he ordered the merchant vessels to remain under pirate escort while carpenters repaired damaged yards, patched shot holes with fresh oak planking, and recorked leaking seams using oakum driven deep into the timbers before hot pine tar sealed the gaps. The women watched this work through narrow hatch openings, realizing the pirates intended to keep the ships seaworthy for a long voyage instead of abandoning them. Below deck, conditions grew worse each day. The air became thick with humidity, mildew, and the sour smell of stagnant bilge water as food supplies dwindled to moldy biscuit. Salted fish hardened like wood, and rainwater gathered in weathered casks. Mothers divided every crust into tiny pieces so children might survive another day, while older women quietly organized groups to care for the sick and wounded. Whenever Blackbeard himself crossed the deck with slow-burning matches braided into his beard, smoke curled around his face until he seemed almost supernatural in the dim light, terrifying even experienced sailors. His reputation alone crushed resistance, yet the prisoners soon noticed something important. The pirate crew lived by strict routines governed through articles of agreement. Watches changed at precise hours. Powder magazines remained heavily guarded, and every evening large portions of the crew gathered amidships to divide provisions and discuss their next course. Hidden in the darkness, several women began memorizing every voice, every footstep, and every careless habit, understanding that survival would depend not upon strength, but upon patience, and the single mistake the pirates had not yet realized they were about to make. The opportunity arrived after nearly 2 weeks at sea, when the pirate squadron anchored behind a chain of small barrier islands to careen one of the captured merchant ships whose hull had begun leaking after the battle. At low tide, the vessel was hauled onto its side using heavy anchors, capstans, and block and tackle systems so the crew could scrape away thick layers of barnacles, replace cracked planks, hammer fresh oakum into opened seams, and coat the hull with boiling pine tar. Nearly every experienced pirate was sent ashore to complete the exhausting work, leaving only a small guard aboard the remaining ships. The women immediately recognized that the balance of power had shifted for the first time since their capture. Through tiny openings in the hold, they watched the reduced watch struggle to control several vessels at once while drunken pirates argued over stolen rum and shares of treasure. Quietly, the prisoners began loosening the wooden pegs securing spare water casks and collecting short lengths of discarded hemp rope hidden beneath cargo. One elderly woman who had spent years aboard merchant ships understood exactly how the anchor cables, steering tackle, and sail controls worked. She whispered instructions to the others, explaining that they did not need to defeat Blackbeard's crew in battle. They needed only a few moments of confusion. If they could break one vessel free with the outgoing tide, the current itself might carry them beyond the range of the pirates' muskets before anyone understood what had happened. Every heartbeat brought them closer to a desperate gamble that would determine whether they regained their freedom or vanished forever into the legend of Blackbeard's deadliest raid. Just before sunrise, a thick blanket of sea fog rolled across the anchorage, reducing visibility to only a few yards. The pirates cursed as damp air swallowed every landmark, making it impossible to distinguish one vessel from another. Hidden beneath the deck, the women waited until the changing watch created the brief moment they had anticipated for days. Working together in complete silence, they removed the wooden wedges securing the anchor cable and cut through a secondary mooring line using a small knife hidden inside a torn shoe. As the tide began flowing toward the open sea, the captured merchant ship drifted almost imperceptibly away from the anchorage. The movement remained unnoticed because the fog concealed everything beyond the nearest mast. Only when the current had carried the vessel several hundred yards did one lookout realize that the ship no longer lay at anchor. Shouts immediately erupted across the pirate camp as Blackbeard's men raced toward their boats, but precious minutes had already been lost. The women hauled together on the braces, allowing a partially furled topsail to catch the strengthening morning breeze while two former sailors' wives struggled to keep the helm steady. The aging merchant vessel creaked beneath enormous strain, yet she answered the wind just enough to increase the distance separating them from their captors. Muskets cracked through the fog, but the bullets splashed harmlessly into the water far astern. For the first time since the raid began, the prisoners watched the black flag disappear into the white mist, realizing that the impossible escape they had imagined in whispers below deck was slowly becoming reality. Freedom, however, remained desperately uncertain. The escaping women possessed a ship, but almost no experienced crew, and the merchant vessel had suffered heavy damage during Blackbeard's attack. The foremast shrouds had been hastily repaired with mismatched hemp rigging. One topsail carried long tears stitched with coarse twine, and several bronze cannon had been thrown overboard by the pirates to lighten the hull after the raid. Every hour, seawater seeped through damaged planking, forcing the survivors to organize constant pumping while others trimmed the sails and searched the cargo for anything useful. They discovered a small chest containing navigational charts, a magnetic compass, dried peas, salted pork, and several barrels of fresh water that the pirates had overlooked. The women divided every ration with strict discipline, refusing to waste even a single biscuit crumb. During the second night, a distant sail appeared on the horizon, and panic swept across the deck as many feared Blackbeard had finally caught them. The unknown vessel altered course, but instead of raising a black flag, she hoisted English colors and fired a single signal gun. Unsure whether to trust the approaching ship, the women raised a torn white sailcloth tied to a boarding pike as a plea for mercy. As daylight spread across the sea, the naval brig closed the distance, and officers staring through brass telescopes could scarcely believe what they were seeing. A merchant vessel commanded not by pirates or sailors, but by exhausted women whose determination had carried them beyond one of the most feared raiders ever to sail the Atlantic. The Royal Navy escorted the battered merchant ship safely into port, where physicians treated the survivors and officials carefully recorded their testimony. News of the escape spread rapidly through the American colonies and the Caribbean, growing with every retelling until many claimed that no group of captives had ever escaped a pirate raid led by Blackbeard himself. Whether every detail survived, unchanged, mattered less than the lesson the story carried. The women had entered the voyage as ordinary passengers, but captivity transformed them into careful observers, patient planners, and determined survivors who relied upon intelligence rather than force. They studied the pirates' routines, waited for the perfect combination of tide, fog, and carelessness, and turned a damaged merchant ship into their road to freedom. Blackbeard's raid remained one of the most terrifying attacks remembered along the Atlantic coast, yet it was ultimately the courage of the survivors, not the pirates' reputation, that became the story whispered in harbors long after the cannon smoke had faded and the black flag disappeared beyond the horizon.